Darius Cole was the kind of mechanic customers drove across town for: quiet, principled, never selling anyone something they didn't need. Then one evening, a battered old veteran's truck rattled into his lot, and Darius made a simple, after-hours decision that cost him his job, his income, and very nearly his reputation. What nobody told him, and what the man who fired him had no idea about, was that fixing that truck was about to pull a billionaire CEO, a 50-year-old secret, and an entire corrupt empire into the light. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. There are some people who carry a kind of quiet you can feel before they even speak. Darius Cole was that kind of man. He arrived at Precision Auto Service before the sun did. 6:15 in the morning, and the parking lot was still dark, the overhead lights humming their pale yellow hum over empty bays. Darius pulled into the side lot in his 10-year-old Chevy, cut the engine, and sat for just a moment. Not because he was tired, not because he was dreading the day. He just liked that part, the stillness before everything started moving. He was 38 years old, broad-shouldered, with hands that told a story all on their own. Calloused, stained faintly around the knuckle lines with grease that never fully washed out no matter how hard he scrubbed. He had dark, steady eyes and a way of moving through a space like he belonged in it, careful, deliberate, never rushed. His daughter Lila always said her dad walked like he was thinking about something important even when he was just going to get the mail. She wasn't wrong. Darius unlocked the employee entrance, switched on the bay lights, and started the day's pre-check. He ran down the work orders on the board, reviewed the afternoon schedule, checked inventory. He had been doing this for 6 years at this location, 6 years of arriving first, leaving last, and doing the work the right way, even when doing it the wrong way would have been faster and easier and nobody would have known the difference. Customers knew him by name, not just regulars. People would call the shop specifically and ask for Darius. Is Cole working today? That was the question. If the answer was yes, they'd wait for him. If the answer was no, some of them came back the next day. Kyle Benton had noticed that. He noticed most things that had nothing to do with him and found a way to make them feel personal anyway. Benton was the regional manager for the chain's 5-location cluster in the metro area. He was 40 years old, soft around the middle, and wore company logo polos that were always just slightly too tight. He had the kind of smile that showed up before his eyes got the message. He had been a decent mechanic once, years ago, before he moved into management and discovered that managing people felt better than fixing cars. Mostly because you could always find something wrong with a person that you couldn't fix and then make it their fault. He stood at the glass partition of his office most mornings and watched the floor, watching Darius especially. He couldn't have explained exactly why it bothered him so much. The way customers asked for Darius, the way the other mechanics listened when Darius spoke, the way Darius never seemed to need anything from anybody, and somehow that made him the most important person in the room. Benton had built a career on being needed. Darius just built things. By 9 that morning, 3 of the 5 bays were occupied and Darius was already deep in a transmission diagnostic on a Ford F-150. His hands moved without hesitation, testing, checking, not guessing. He was humming something low and tuneless, barely audible over the shop noise. Across the garage, near the small waiting area that connected to the customer lounge, a 9-year-old girl sat cross-legged on a plastic chair with a spiral-bound sketchbook open on her lap. Lila Cole had her father's same dark eyes and her mother's mouth. Full, expressive, quick to smile at the right things and slow to smile at the wrong ones. She wore her hair in 2 puffs and had a collection of colored pencils arranged in a specific order in the front pocket of her backpack. She was particular about things. Most people who met her described her as an old soul, though she would have found that description annoying if she'd known they were saying it. She had no school today, a staff development day, and her dad had nowhere else to take her. So here she was, same as she'd been on maybe a dozen similar days over the years. She didn't mind. She liked the garage. She liked the smell of it, motor oil and metal and something that reminded her of the cold. And she liked the sounds, the hydraulic lifts and the rattling of socket sets and the occasional burst of an air wrench. She sketched it all. Engine cross-sections she'd seen in her dad's repair manuals. Brake assemblies. transmission diagrams she'd drawn from memory after watching her dad explain them to a customer once. Hey, Lilabug. One of the other mechanics, a big guy named Terry with a beard that was getting out of hand, leaned over her shoulder and squinted at her sketchbook. Is that a carburetor? Fuel injection system, she said, without looking up. Same thing. It's really not. Terry grinned and walked away. This happened roughly every time she was there. Some version of this exact exchange. The mechanics teased her gently, and she corrected them firmly, and everyone found it charming even though she wasn't trying to be charming. When her dad took a break mid-morning, he sat beside her with a bottle of water and looked at what she was drawing. She had added labels, small neat print identifying each component. You know, he said, studying it, you got the fuel pressure regulator a little off. She erased immediately. Show me. He took her pencil and adjusted the sketch. Just slightly. She studied the correction, then nodded and took the pencil back. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Dad, she said. Yeah. What do you want to build? Like if you could build anything. He thought about that. A shop, he said. My own. Where I'd do it right. She nodded like that was the correct answer and went back to drawing. At 11 o'clock, Benton called a meeting. The full staff, 8 mechanics, 2 service advisors, a parts runner. He stood at the head of the break room with a laminated sheet of paper and a look on his face that suggested he was about to deliver news he was personally very excited about. The company was rolling out a new quarterly incentive structure. The short version, upsell quotas. Every mechanic was now expected to generate a minimum revenue per vehicle beyond the initial service request. Brake flushes, coolant treatments, air filter upgrades. The corporate diagnostic software had been updated to flag additional recommended services, and staff were expected to present all of them to the customer as necessary. We're not a charity, Benton said. He said it like it was funny. Nobody laughed. Every car that comes through here is a revenue opportunity. We leave money on the table. That comes out of the bonus pool. That comes out of your pockets. One of the service advisors asked a clarifying question about the diagnostic software, specifically whether the flag recommendations were based on actual vehicle condition or on mileage averages. Benton said that wasn't really the relevant question. Darius, leaning against the back wall with his arms crossed, spoke up, quietly, not confrontationally. He never raised his voice, never performed his objections for an audience. He just said it clearly, the way he said most things. We fix what's broken, nothing more. Benton looked at him. That's a nice philosophy, Cole. But philosophy doesn't make payroll. Neither does selling a coolant flush to a car that had one 6 months ago. A couple of the other mechanics shifted uncomfortably. Not because they disagreed. Most of them agreed completely. But because disagreeing with Benton had consequences that tended to show up slowly and quietly, like a slow leak you don't notice until the tire's flat on a highway. Benton held Darius' gaze for a moment, then smiled his front-running smile. New policy is effective immediately. Any questions? My door's open. Nobody went to his door. The afternoon moved on. Darius went back to work. He flagged 2 of the diagnostic software's recommendations as non-applicable on the vehicle he was servicing and documented his reasoning in the notes. He always documented his reasoning. He had been documenting his reasoning for 6 years, and nobody had ever challenged it because his documentation was always correct. It was almost 4 o'clock when the old pickup rolled in. They heard it before they saw it. A deep, rattling cough from an engine that was running on experience and stubbornness rather than optimal mechanical function. The truck was a 1972 Ford F-100 dark green that had faded to something closer to gray-green over 50 years of weather and road and time. The chrome was pitted. The rear quarter panel had a dent that had been there long enough to seem intentional. The bed was empty except for a folded moving blanket and a rusted toolbox. It pulled into the lot slowly, carefully, like its driver understood exactly how much effort it was taking. The man who stepped out was 67 years old, white-haired, with the lean build of someone who had been strong most of his life and was still more capable than he looked. He walked with a cane, a plain wooden one, not the medical kind, the kind of man carves himself or finds at a hardware store. His jacket was old but clean. His eyes, when he looked up at the shop, with a clear light blue of a winter sky. His name was Henry Whitaker, though no one knew that yet. He stood beside the truck for a moment the way people do when they're bracing themselves for bad news. Then he walked toward the service desk. Darius was nearby, cleaning his hands with a shop rag, when Henry came in. Their eyes met. "She's running rough," Henry said. "Been rough a while. I kept thinking she'd even out." "How long?" Henry considered. 3 months, maybe. Started gradual. Last 2 weeks it got worse. Darius walked out to the truck with him. He listened to the engine, just listened, standing there with his head slightly tilted, then got in and drove it the length of the parking lot and back. He did it twice. He popped the hood and stood over it for a long moment, not touching, just looking. "Transmission's slipping," he said, "but it's not worn out. Something's off in the linkage. Maybe the throttle position sensor's giving bad readings. Could also be a vacuum line. I need to get under it." Henry nodded slowly. "How much are we talking?" Darius could have given him a number right then. The corporate diagnostic software, when he pulled it up and ran the VIN, generated a repair estimate that came out to just over $1,900. New transmission fluid service, full drivetrain diagnostic, a list of recommended preventative measures that had nothing to do with what was actually wrong. Darius looked at the screen. Then he looked at the truck. "Let me take a closer look before I give you a number," he said. "Come in and have a seat." He brought Henry into the waiting area, and Lila was still there, sketchbook in hand, and she looked up at the old man with the cane and said, "Is it your truck outside?" "The old green one." Henry smiled for the first time. "That's her." "It's cool," Lila said simply, and went back to drawing. Henry sat down across from her, and while he waited, he started talking. Not to anyone in particular, just the way people talk when they've been carrying something a long time and the right kind of silence draws it out of them. He talked about the truck, how it had belonged to his late brother, how his brother had driven it home after Vietnam, all the way from Fort Bragg to a small town in eastern Tennessee, and how that drive had taken 3 days because the engine kept running hot and his brother had stopped at every rest area and let it cool and then kept going. How the truck had sat in his barn for years after his brother passed. How Henry had decided, finally, to get it running again, to keep it going, because some things deserve to keep going. Darius had come back to the waiting area to check on something and had stopped in the doorway, listening. He saw the military unit sticker on the rear window when he walked back to the bay. 101st Airborne, same division his grandfather had told stories about. He stood there for a moment with his hand resting on the truck's fender. He went back under the vehicle. He spent 40 minutes under there. When he came out, he had his diagnosis. The transmission linkage had a worn bushing, a $2 part. The throttle position sensor needed recalibration, not replacement. There was a cracked vacuum line causing the rough idle. Total parts cost, under $30. Total labor, maybe 2 hours of careful work. The corporate software had recommended $1,900 of repairs for a $30 fix. He found Henry in the waiting area and sat down across from him. He explained what he'd found. He explained it clearly and simply, the way he always explained things, not talking down to the customer, not rushing through it, just laying it out like it deserved to be understood. Henry listened. When Darius finished, Henry nodded. Then he asked, carefully, what the total would be. Darius told him the number. The real number, not the software number. Henry went quiet. He looked at his hands on the top of his cane. "I appreciate the honesty," he said, "but even that's going to be hard right now. I'm on a fixed income, and the month's already thin." He started to stand. "I appreciate your time. I'll figure something else out." Lila, who had been quiet and still through all of this in the way she got quiet, and still when she was paying close attention, watched the old man rise. She watched him look back at the truck through the window. She heard him say, very quietly, more to himself than anyone, "Guess she's done for good." Her father heard it too. Darius walked Henry to his truck. He helped him get the hood back down. He watched the old man get behind the wheel and sit there for a moment, and then the truck started, reluctantly, roughly, and pulled slowly out of the lot. Darius stood in the bay entrance for a long moment. Then he went back to work. He finished out the day. He clocked out at the normal time. He took Lila to get dinner at the diner 2 blocks over, the one where the woman behind the counter always gave Lila extra crackers with her soup without being asked. They talked about school, about the fuel injection diagram, about what they were going to watch that night. Then Darius dropped Lila at the apartment, told her he had to go back to the shop for a bit, and drove back to Precision Auto. He used his employee key. He pulled the parts he needed from the back stock. The bushing cost $2.18, the vacuum line less than $5. He logged both parts as his personal purchase and left the cash in the register drawer. He did not log the job. He did not open a ticket. He did not run the corporate diagnostic. He just got under the truck. He had called Henry and asked him to drop it off that evening and leave the key. And he worked. He worked for 2.5 hours by the light of his work lamp. Methodical, careful, the same way he always worked. Lila had texted once. "You okay?" He texted back. "Fine. Be home soon." She texted again, a few minutes later. "Are we going to get in trouble?" He looked at the phone for a moment. Then he typed back. "Sometimes doing right costs something. Go to sleep." He finished at 10:30. He lowered the truck, started her up, and listened. The engine turned over smooth and steady, a deep, even rumble that hadn't been there before. He adjusted the idle, ran her for 5 minutes, checked everything. She was right. She was running right. He locked up and drove home. Henry arrived at 8 the next morning, walking with his cane through the morning light, not entirely sure what he was going to find. He had left the truck as Darius asked. He had not slept especially well. The truck was parked exactly where he'd left it. He unlocked it, got in, and turned the key. The engine started on the first try. It didn't cough or hesitate or rattle. It turned over clean and settled into an idle that was steady as a heartbeat. Henry sat there with his hands on the wheel, and he did not say anything for a long moment. When he got out, his eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the morning. Darius was already inside, at his bay, working a scheduled job, when Henry came to find him. Henry looked at him for a long moment, and then he raised his right hand in a slow, deliberate salute. Darius nodded once, small and quiet. "What do I owe you?" Henry asked. "Part cost," Darius said. $7 and change. "I already covered it." Henry started to argue. Darius shook his head, not unkindly. "You served. I fixed a truck. We're good." The old man stood there for another moment, then nodded slowly and turned to go. It should have been the end of something. It turned out to be the beginning. Kyle Benton came in at 9. He had been reviewing the previous day's billing summaries the night before. He always did from home, on his laptop, with a whiskey, and something hadn't added up. The parts inventory had 2 items checked against a cash register entry that didn't match any open work order. Small amounts, less than $10. But Benton had a sharp eye for discrepancies, especially discrepancies involving Darius Cole. He pulled the shop camera footage. He watched Darius arrive after hours. He watched him work. He watched the old truck roll in and watched it leave the next morning running smooth. He watched all of it. Then he saved the file. He walked onto the floor at 9:15 with the printout in his hand, and he did not go to Darius privately. He did not call him into the office. He walked to the center of the main bay, where 3 other mechanics were working and 2 customers were visible through the waiting area window, and he called Darius' name across the floor. "Cole, here, now." Darius set down his tool, looked up. He walked over without hurrying. Benton held up the printout. "You want to explain this?" "I did a repair off the books. I paid for the parts myself. You performed unauthorized labor on this company's property using this company's tools and this company's employee hours, and you didn't run a ticket. The customer couldn't pay. The truck needed about $30 of work the diagnostic had inflated to $2,000. That's not your call to make. Somebody had to make it." Benton's voice had been rising the entire time, and now it was loud enough that the other mechanics had stopped working and the customers in the waiting area had gone still. Benton didn't care about that. "Maybe you wanted it that way. You stole company labor," he said. "That's what this is. You used shop resources to perform a job that generated 0 revenue. That's theft." Henry Whitaker, who had stopped near the waiting area door on his way out when he heard his name mentioned, not directly, but the shape of it in Benton's accusations, stepped forward. "That truck is mine," Henry said. "I asked him to help me. If there's blame to assign it to me." Benton looked at the old man with barely concealed contempt. "Sir, this is an internal matter. It's not internal when you're accusing a man of theft for doing a kindness. I'll need you to step back, sir, or I'll have security escort you out." Henry stood his ground for a moment longer, looking at Benton the way men who have seen real things look at men who haven't. Then he stepped back, not because he was intimidated, because he could see it wasn't going to help Darius any further. Benton turned back to Darius. He said the words clearly in front of everyone. You're terminated. Effective immediately. Violation of corporate revenue policy. Collect your personal belongings, and your key card will be deactivated at the end of business today. The other mechanics were silent. They all knew. Every single one of them knew that what Darius had done was right. They knew it the way you know things that sit below argument, in the place where fairness lives before anyone has a chance to complicate it. But Benton had the authority, and authority didn't always need to be right to be effective. And every one of them had a rent payment or a car note or a kid in braces. And so they stayed quiet, and the silence sat in the bay like something with weight. Darius nodded. Once. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He turned and walked to the locker room. Lila was still in the waiting area. She had been brought in again today, a late start at school, a transit delay, and she had been sitting with her sketchbook, and she had heard everything. She was 9 years old, and she understood what had just happened completely. She watched her father come out of the locker room with his toolbox and his thermos and his small framed photo of her mother that he kept on the shelf inside. She watched Benton stand near the service desk with his arms crossed and that practiced, almost smile on his face. She watched the other mechanics not look up. She got up and walked to her father. She took his free hand without being asked. They walked out together. Henry was waiting by his truck in the parking lot. He looked stricken in the way people do when they understand that their good fortune has come at someone else's cost. I'm sorry, he said. He said it directly and sincerely, the way people who mean things say them. This is because of me. Darius shook his head. This is because of him. He tilted his head back toward the shop. Not you. Henry reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. He held it out. There wasn't much in it, Darius could tell, but Henry was holding it out like it was everything he had, which it might have been. Darius gently pushed his hand back. You served, he said again. I fixed a truck. We're good. Henry stood there. He looked at Lila. She looked back at him with those steady dark eyes. I'm going to make this right, Henry said quietly. Darius said nothing. He loaded his things into the back of his Chevy, buckled Lila in, and drove home. Far across the city, in a building made mostly of glass and intention, Marcus Whitaker was in a conference room on the 22nd floor, discussing quarterly earnings with 4 men in suits who all had the same posture and the same careful way of saying numbers out loud. Marcus was 45, sharp-featured, controlled in his movements like someone who had learned long ago that stillness communicated authority. He had built Whitaker Automotive Group from a 3-shop regional chain into a 47-location operation, and he had done it through discipline and systems and an absolute refusal to let sentiment interfere with structure. Revenue per service ticket is down 3% in the northern region, one of the suits said. Marcus made a note. Enforcement of the upsell protocol. Inconsistent. Regional managers have varying compliance rates. Marcus tapped his pen on the table once. Stricter enforcement. Non negotiating. This quarter. Nobody pushed back. Nobody ever pushed back in this room. That was partly why Marcus liked this room. He had no idea about a mechanic named Darius Cole. He had no idea about an old green truck. He had no idea that a phone call was being made, right at that moment, from a kitchen table in a modest house on the eastern edge of the city, by a 67-year-old man with a cane and a clear conscience. Henry sat at his kitchen table with his hands around a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He looked at the phone for a long moment. He thought about Darius walking out of that shop with his daughter's hand in his and his chin up. He thought about what it cost a man to do the right thing in a world that charged you for it. He picked up the phone. He found a number he hadn't dialed in almost 2 years. It rang 3 times before it answered. Henry. The voice on the other end was measured, careful, carrying something that might have been relief. Noah, Henry said. He paused. Do you still care about what this company's become? There was a pause on the other end. A long one. Tell me what happened, Noah said. Henry told him. All of it. The truck. The repair. The firing. Darius. Lila. The look on Benton's face when he said the word theft to a man who had done nothing but good. Noah listened without interrupting. When Henry finished, Noah was quiet for a moment. "I'll come," he said. That night, at the apartment, Darius sat at the kitchen table with the bills spread out in front of him. The month was already committed. Rent, Lila's school fees, the car, the utilities. He had 2 weeks of emergency savings. He had a skill set that was real and provable, and he would find work. He knew that. But 2 weeks was 2 weeks. From down the hall, he could hear Lila in her room. She was being quiet in the way she got quiet when she was thinking about something she didn't want to bring up yet. He could always tell. The phone rang twice before he realized it was from a collection service on the medical bill from last year. Lila's emergency room visit, the one he'd been paying down in installments. He let go to voicemail. He wrote down the callback number on a notepad and set it aside. He sat at the table for a long time after Lila had gone to sleep, not doing anything in particular, just sitting with it. He was not a man who fell apart easily, but he was also not a man who pretended things weren't what they were. What they were tonight was hard. In the morning, he made Lila breakfast, eggs and toast, same as always, and walked her to the bus stop. When he got back, the black SUV was parked across the street from their building. Clean, quiet, engine off. He stood on the sidewalk and looked at it for a moment. The door opened. The black SUV sat there like it had all the time in the world. Darius stood on the sidewalk in front of his building with his coffee going cold in his hand, studying it the way he studied an engine he hadn't worked on before, looking for what it was, not what it seemed to be. The windows were tinted just enough. The plates were private. No logo, no livery sticker, nothing that told him who was inside or why they'd parked across from his home on a Tuesday morning. The door opened. The man who stepped out was not what Darius expected, though he couldn't have said exactly what he had expected. He was in his early 40s, lean, dressed in dark slacks and a plain gray shirt. No tie, no jacket, with the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. He wasn't wearing it like armor the way some men did. He just moved through the world like he'd thought carefully about where he was going before he went. He looked at Darius directly, not sizing him up, not performing, just looking. "Mr. Cole," he said. His voice was even, unhurried. "My name is Noah Whitaker. I was hoping you'd give me a few minutes." Darius didn't move from the sidewalk. "You want to tell me why you're parked outside my home before I decide whether to give you anything?" Noah nodded, like that was the correct response, and he respected it. "The truck you fixed 2 nights ago. I need you to know something about it." Darius waited. "That truck," Noah said, "belongs to me." The silence stretched out between them. A city bus rumbled past at the end of the block. Darius looked at this man, calm, grounded, nothing fake in his face, and tried to work out the shape of what he was being told. "Henry Whitaker was driving it," Darius said. "Henry is my uncle," Noah said. "He's been keeping the truck for me for about 3 years. I travel for work, and I don't have a proper place for it. So he stores it, takes it out sometimes." He paused. "He called me yesterday. He told me what happened at the shop." Darius said nothing. Noah took a step closer, not aggressive, just closing the distance to something more like a conversation. "He told me what you did, and he told me what it cost you." He looked at Darius steadily. "I wanted to meet the man who did that." "You met him," Darius said. "What else?" Noah almost smiled. "There's something else you should know. About the company that fired you." He paused just a beat. "Whitaker Automotive Group. My last name isn't a coincidence." Darius went still. "Marcus Whitaker is my brother," Noah said. "He's the CEO. He built the chain I used to work for, used to help run, actually before I left." He said it without bitterness, just as fact. "Marcus and I have been estranged for a few years. Difference of opinion on what the company should be." Darius looked at him for a long moment. The morning light was flat and gray, and the street was doing its ordinary Tuesday business around them, and none of this felt like any Tuesday Darius had expected to have. "Why are you here?" Darius asked. Not rudely, just directly. He was a direct man. "Because Henry asked me to come," Noah said. "And because when he told me what you did, the repair, the way you handled it, refusing to upsell a veteran on work he didn't need, I needed to see for myself." He paused. "I've been watching what my brother's company has become for years. From a distance. The upsell mandates, the inflated diagnostics, the revenue over everything culture. I left because I couldn't be part of it anymore. But leaving didn't fix anything. Darius was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want from me?" Noah reached into the inside pocket of his shirt and produced a folded piece of paper. He held it out. "I privately fund a restoration garage about 20 miles east. Small, private, high-quality work. I'd like you to come work there. The pay is double what you were making at Precision." Darius looked at the paper. He didn't take it. "I appreciate that," he said, "but I'm not looking for rescue." Noah didn't lower the paper immediately. "It's not charity. You're the most skilled mechanic my uncle's encountered in 40 years, and he knows engines. I have real work that needs doing." "That may be," Darius said, "but taking a quiet job and moving on isn't what I want." "What do you want?" Darius' jaw tightened slightly. "I want the truth of what happened to be on record. I want the people at that shop, the ones who were afraid to say anything. I want them to not have to be afraid. I want the man who falsified those diagnostics and build a policy around squeezing money out of people who trust him. I want that to mean something." He stopped. "A job offer doesn't do any of that." Noah looked at him for a long moment. Then he slowly folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. "You're right," he said quietly. "It doesn't." They stood there in the thin morning light. From behind the front door of the building, Lila's voice carried through the glass. She was talking to herself the way she did when she was working on something, a low, focused murmur. Darius glanced back. Noah followed his gaze. "Your daughter?" he asked. "Yeah. Henry told me about her too." Noah was quiet for a moment. "She sounds like someone who pays attention." "She sees everything," Darius said. There was no pride in it the way parents sometimes perform pride. Just truth. Lila had come to the door without either of them noticing. She was standing on the other side of the glass with her sketchbook under her arm, looking at Noah with open, steady curiosity. Darius opened the door, and she stepped out. "This is Mr. Whitaker," Darius said. "Noah," Noah said, and crouched down slightly to be closer to her level. "You're Lila?" "Yes," she said. She studied him. "Why are you here?" "Because of your dad." She considered that. Then she said, and it came out with the simple clarity of someone who hasn't yet learned to soften inconvenient observations. "Is your brother the one who fired him?" Noah straightened slowly. He looked at Darius. Darius looked back with the expression of a man whose daughter had just said, out loud, the thing that was actually on the table. "Not directly," Noah said carefully, "but his company did." Lila thought about this. What if the boss doesn't know the truth about what actually happened? What if he only heard one side? Nobody said anything for a moment. The question sat in the air between the three of them. Simple, unanswered, and more pointed than it had any right to be coming from a 9-year-old. Noah turned back to Darius. Something had shifted in his expression. Not resolved, exactly, but clarified. Like something he'd been thinking around the edges of had just stepped into the center. "Maybe," he said slowly, "it's time my brother sees what his company really is." Darius held his gaze. "And if he doesn't want to see it, then at least we'll know," Noah said. "And so will everyone else." That night, across town, Kyle Benton sat at his desk after hours with his office door locked and the blinds drawn. He had spent the better part of the day watching his email, waiting for any signal from above that the cold termination had generated feedback. He had expected nothing. Most firings at this level generated nothing. A brief report filed, a locker cleared, a name removed from the schedule. What he hadn't expected was that Marcus Whitaker's office had requested Benton's regional compliance files. Routine audit, the email said. Quarterly review. But Benton knew the difference between a routine request and a pointed one, and this one had a particular feel to it. He opened his own files. He looked at the billing records. There were patterns in there that would not survive scrutiny. Ghost repair charges, inflated labor hours, diagnostic software manipulation that pushed flagged repairs onto vehicles that didn't need them. It had been generating extra revenue for 18 months. It had been Benton's own system, his own modification, running quietly underneath the official numbers. It was not, technically, just aggressive upselling. It was fraud. He sat back in his chair. He thought about Darius Cole, who had documented everything, who had always documented everything, whose meticulous records were a paper trail in the opposite direction. He thought about the old man, Henry, who had stood in the middle of the shop floor and looked at Benton with those clear eyes. He needed a better story. The termination needed sharper teeth. He opened a new document and began to type. He wrote carefully, choosing his words the way someone builds a case rather than describes one. Inventory discrepancy. Possible parts theft. Pattern of noncompliance, suggesting ethical violations. He saved the file. He sent copies to 3 addresses, his own personal backup, the corporate HR channel, and his direct supervisor. He had fired Darius Cole for one reason. He was going to make sure the record said something else. 3 days later, Darius Cole walked into the lobby of Whitaker Automotive Group headquarters for the first time in his life. He had worn what he wore to church: dark slacks, a pressed shirt, his good shoes. Not because he was trying to impress anyone, because he was representing himself, and he did that with care regardless of the audience. Noah walked beside him. They had spoken twice more since the morning on the sidewalk, and something had formed between them. Not friendship yet, but the kind of mutual respect that forms fast when two people have similar instincts about what matters. Noah had arranged the meeting. He had not told his brother everything that was coming. The building was glass and steel and intention, 40 stories of corporate architecture designed to communicate permanence and scale. The lobby had a marble floor and a reception desk, with 2 people behind it who looked like they'd been hired to look exactly as they looked. There was a large logo on the wall, Whitaker Automotive Group, silver letters, a stylized gear, and beneath it a framed photograph of Marcus Whitaker from some industry event, looking at the camera like the camera had asked for the privilege. Darius looked at the photograph. He didn't say anything. They took the elevator to the 22nd floor. Marcus Whitaker's office was at the end of a long, quiet corridor with carpet that absorbed sound and art on the walls that had been selected to signal taste rather than express it. His assistant, young, efficient, the kind of person who anticipated everything, led them in without fanfare. Marcus was standing at the window when they entered, looking out over the city the way people in large offices in tall buildings do when they want you to walk into the room while their back is to you. He turned when he heard them come in, and his eyes went first to Noah, a flicker of something complicated, old, and unresolved, and then to Darius, whom he assessed in approximately 1 second and filed somewhere in a category that wasn't quite dismissal, but wasn't far from it. Noah, he said. Flat. Marcus, Noah said. Equally flat. Marcus looked at Darius. Mr. Cole. He gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. Seat. They sat. Marcus sat across from them, hands flat on the desk, controlled as always. I've been told there's been an incident at the Northern District location, Marcus said. I want to be clear. I don't typically involve myself in individual termination matters. The regional management structure exists for that purpose. The regional management structure is the problem, Noah said. That's a broad claim. It gets specific very fast. Marcus turned to Darius. His voice was professional, his tone measured. Mr. Cole, I understand you performed an unauthorized service without billing the customer or logging the job. I repaired a veteran's truck, Darius said. The corporate diagnostic had flagged $1,900 of unnecessary work on a vehicle that needed a $30 fix. I did the $30 fix. I paid for the parts myself. The policy is what's worth examining, Darius said. He said it without heat, without any performance of outrage, just as a mechanic who had looked at the problem and was telling you what he found. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. Policy exists because sentiment doesn't scale. 47 locations, several thousand service tickets a week. We cannot run on individual judgment calls. Integrity scales, Noah said. Marcus looked at his brother. The old friction was right there on the surface, close as it always was. That's a slogan, not a management principle. It is until you see what ignoring it has cost you. Noah reached into the leather portfolio he'd carried in and placed a USB drive on the desk. Before we get to Bennon's report on Darius, which I'd like you to look at carefully because several things in it don't match the timeline, I want you to see some footage. He had brought a laptop. He opened it, plugged in the drive, turned the screen toward Marcus. The footage was from the shop cameras. Not the footage Benton had pulled of the after-hours repair, different clips. Weeks and months of them, carefully selected. Darius at the service desk, walking a customer through a repair estimate, pointing at the screen, then pointing at the car, then crossing items off the list. A customer's hand, grateful and surprised, reaching to shake his. Darius flagging a corporate recommended upsell as unnecessary and documenting why, visible in the screen recording. Another customer, elderly, who had been quoted $800, leaving after paying $200 because Darius had gotten under the car himself before writing the estimate. Marcus watched without expression. He watched all of it. Then Noah pulled up a second set of files. Billing records from Benton's region. Highlighted columns. Invoice numbers that appeared twice in the system with different amounts. Repair line items charged to vehicles that had been in for oil changes. Labor hours logged against jobs that internal timestamps showed had been completed in a third of the listed time. This is from a 3-month audit of Benton's regional billing, Noah said. I hired a forensic accounting firm 8 weeks ago, privately, before any of this happened with Darius. He looked at Marcus directly. I'd already been watching. What happened to Darius just made it impossible to stay quiet. Marcus sat very still. He was looking at the numbers. His expression had not changed exactly, but something behind it had shifted, a controlled man encountering something he could not immediately reorganize into a shape he preferred. Benton was seated in the conference room down the hall, where Marcus's assistant had placed him after he'd been called in for what he'd been told was a routine follow-up meeting. When Marcus's assistant appeared at the door and asked him to join them in the main office, Benton came in straightening his collar and wearing the expression of a man who believed he was about to be thanked. He stopped when he saw Darius. Something moved across his face, surprise first, then a fast calculation, then a composure that cost him something to maintain. Kyle, Marcus said. His voice had changed. Not louder, not harsh, but precise in a way it hadn't been before. The way a tool is precise when it's being used for what was made for. I want to talk about this report. He held up the document Benton had filed, specifically the inventory discrepancy claim and the theft notation. Mr. Cole removed parts from inventory without authorization. He paid for the parts, Noah said. Cash in the register drawer. It's documented. He violated revenue policy. He fixed a truck, Darius said. Quiet, unmoving. Benton turned to him. You undermined this company's operating structure. You decided your personal judgment was worth more than a system that. A system you manipulated, Noah said. The sentence landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Benton went very still. Marcus put the audit printout on the desk and turned it to face Benton. He didn't say anything. He just put it there and waited. Benton looked at the numbers. He looked at Marcus. Something in the calculation behind his eyes was running fast, revising, searching for footing that wasn't there. Whatever issues there may be in the billing data, he started carefully. That's a separate matter from the Cole situation. It's not separate at all, Marcus said. His voice was still controlled, but there was nothing warm in it now. Because your report on Mr. Cole was filed after my office requested your compliance records. And your report on Mr. Cole contains allegations that don't hold up against the documented timeline. He paused. So we have either a performance problem or an integrity problem. And I'm looking at evidence that tells me which one it is. Benton said nothing. You're suspended pending the completion of the audit, Marcus said. HR will be in contact by end of day. Benton looked at Darius one more time. The practiced composure had come apart at its seams. What was underneath it was not pretty, not dangerous, just small, the way things that are built on insecurity look when the insecurity is exposed. He turned and left. The room was quiet. Marcus sat back in his chair. He looked at his brother, then at Darius, then down at the desk. He was processing something that his usual structures weren't quite equipped for. The audit findings, the false report, the footage of a mechanic doing his job the right way in a company whose policy had been pulling in the opposite direction. It was all mapping onto something he hadn't fully admitted to himself yet. Then the door opened. Marcus's assistant leaned in. There's a Mr. Whitaker in the lobby, sir. An older gentleman. He says he doesn't have an appointment, but he'd like to come up. Marcus looked at Noah. Noah said nothing. He had known Henry was coming. He hadn't told Marcus. Henry Whitaker came in slowly, leaning on his cane, moving through the large office with the unhurried quality of a man who has been in difficult places and learned that the difficulty is not in the room, it's in what you carry into it. He was wearing a jacket Darius had not seen before, dark, pressed, with military decorations on the left breast. Service ribbons. A purple heart. A combat infantryman badge. A small cluster of other commendations that told a story in the language of sacrifice. Marcus watched him walk in. His expression changed in a way he couldn't entirely control. The practiced CEO, composure giving way for a moment to something older and more human. Henry stood in front of the desk. He looked at Marcus. "You don't know me," Henry said, "but I knew your father." The room went very still. "We served together," Henry said. "Vietnam, 68 and 69. He was the best man I knew over there. Saved my life twice, once with a tourniquet and once by pulling me out of a ditch under fire. I never forgot that. I never forgot him." He paused. When he came home, he drove that old Ford from the base all the way back to Tennessee. I was there when he got in it. I watched him go. Marcus was not moving. "Your father gave me that truck before he died," Henry said. "He said it had carried him home, and maybe it'd carry someone else home someday, too. I kept it. All these years." He looked at Marcus steadily. "That's the truck your man fired a good mechanic for fixing." The silence that followed was the kind that has mass to it. Marcus looked at the desk, then at Noah. Noah was watching him with the careful attention of someone who has waited a long time for a specific moment and isn't going to miss it now that it's arrived. Darius watched Marcus Whitaker, billionaire, CEO, calculated and controlled, sit in his executive chair with the weight of what he'd just heard settling over him like something he could not manage or reorganize or redirect. The truck he'd built a firing around. The truck at the center of everything. It had been his father's, and a man with nothing but integrity had fixed it at cost to himself. The expression on Marcus's face was not quite guilt. Not yet. But it was the thing that comes just before guilt, when a person is standing at the edge of a true accounting of themselves and beginning to understand that they cannot look away. He had fired a man for honoring his father's truck. He hadn't known. That was the thing. He genuinely had not known. But not knowing had not protected anyone. Not Darius. Not Henry. Not the dozens of customers who had paid inflated rates under Bennon's system that Marcus's policies had made possible. He had built a machine. He had not watched what the machine was doing. And now it was all in this room with him. The silence in Marcus Whitaker's office didn't last long. Silence never does when there's money involved. Henry left the way he came in, quietly, without ceremony, leaning on his cane and nodding once to Darius as he passed. Noah walked him to the elevator. Marcus stayed at his desk, not moving for a long time after the door closed, staring at something that wasn't in the room. Darius waited. He was good at waiting. When Noah came back, Marcus looked up like a man surfacing from deep water. "I want a full audit of Bennon's region," he said. His voice was controlled again, the professional register back in place, but it was sitting over something heavier now, something he was managing rather than dismissing. Everything. Billing records, diagnostic logs, service histories. "I want it started today." Noah looked at him. "Marcus." "Today," Marcus said. Flat. Final. He glanced at Darius once, briefly, then back to his desk. "HR will be in touch with you, Mr. Cole, regarding the circumstances of your termination." It wasn't an apology. It was an acknowledgement. It was the language of a man who had been rattled, but was retreating back in a process as fast as he could move. Darius recognized it for what it was. He didn't push. He stood, buttoned his shirt at the cuff the way he always did when he was wrapping up, and walked out. Noah caught up with him at the elevator. "He's shaken," Noah said quietly. "He's cautious," Darius said. "With Marcus, that's the same thing. It's a start." Darius looked at the elevator doors. It's not enough yet. He was right. And things were about to stop being quiet. Kyle Benton had been escorted from the building that afternoon with his access badge deactivated and an HR notice on its way to his personal email. By the time he reached his car in the parking structure, he had already made 2 phone calls. By the time he reached the highway, he had a plan. Not a good plan, but the kind that desperate men build fast when the walls start closing. Aggressive, self-serving, and just complicated enough to buy time. He knew what the audit was going to find. He had built the system himself. He knew exactly which invoices were clean and which ones weren't, and the ones that weren't were enough to end his career and start a separate, much worse conversation. What he needed was a counter-narrative, something to muddy the water, redirect attention, make Darius Cole the story instead of Kyle Benton. He started making calls to people inside the company, managers at other locations who owed him favors, a regional HR contact who had looked the other way on prior complaints. He didn't frame it as panic. He framed it as loyalty. He said that Cole had been terminated for cause, ethical violations, possible parts theft, and that this was a corporate attempt to reverse a justified decision under outside pressure. He said the family involved had connections and were leveraging them. He used words like integrity and policy and due process, and he said them in the careful order of someone who understood that language could be arranged to mean almost anything if you did it right. It bought him about 36 hours, because someone else was moving faster. One of the mechanics at Precision Auto, a quiet man named Derek who had worked alongside Darius for 4 years and said nothing on the day of the firing because he had 2 daughters in elementary school and a mother in a care facility and couldn't afford to lose his job, had gone home that afternoon and sat at his kitchen table for a long time. He thought about Darius walking out with Lila's hand in his. He thought about the look on Henry's face. He thought about the fact that he had stood there and said nothing, which was a kind of choice too. He got out his phone. He had footage, personal footage, taken weeks earlier on a slow afternoon when he'd been testing a new phone camera. Darius, at the service bay, patiently explaining to an elderly woman why she didn't need the radiator flush the system had flagged, crossing it off the estimate by hand, handing her back $65 in savings. It was 3 minutes of ordinary footage of an ordinary Tuesday that was, when you looked at it now, extraordinary. Derek posted it. He didn't write much. Just, this is the mechanic they fired for helping a veteran. His name is Darius Cole. By morning, it had 40,000 views. By the following evening, it had crossed 400,000, and a headline that was attaching itself to the story. Mechanic fired for helping veteran. Company cited for overcharging customers. Was appearing in comment sections and shared links and local news alerts faster than any corporate communications team could respond to. Darius didn't know about the post until Noah called him. He sat at his kitchen table with his phone in his hand and read the comments for a few minutes. A strange experience, seeing his own name and his own face in the context of other people's outrage and admiration. And then he set the phone face down and looked at the wall. Lila was at school. He was glad she wasn't home to see it yet. But school had its own version of the news cycle. By third period, several of Lila's classmates had seen the story. Older siblings, parents who'd mentioned it over breakfast, a teacher who'd brought it up in a current event segment without knowing Lila was in the room. The reactions split the way reactions to anything do. Some kids were openly admiring. Your dad's famous. That's actually cool. Others were the kind of cruel that 9-year-olds can be without understanding the full weight of what they're doing. My mom said your dad got fired for stealing. Lila didn't cry. She didn't argue loudly. She held herself the way her father held himself, straight, still, absorbing. She came home that afternoon and sat across from Darius at the kitchen table and told him what had happened at school in the same clear, factual way he'd taught her to report things. He listened all the way through without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "You okay?" She thought about it honestly. "I'm okay," she said. "I just want people to know the real story." "They will," he said. "It takes a little longer than a day, but they will." She nodded and went to her room. She did not sketch that evening. She sat on her bed and thought, which was sometimes what she did instead. Noah came by the next morning and sat with Darius over coffee. He explained, carefully and without dramatizing it, what corporate damage control looked like from the inside. How the instinct of large companies under pressure was not to correct course, but to manage perception, to acknowledge just enough, deflect the rest, and wait for the news cycle to move on. He said Marcus was not yet in the position of a man making real decisions. He was in the position of a man deciding how much he had to give in order to protect what he had. "He hasn't called me," Darius said. "No," Noah said. "He won't, not yet. Not personally." "Then what is he doing?" "Managing," Noah said, "which is different from leading." Henry had been watching the news coverage from his kitchen, steady and quiet, the same way he'd watched a lot of difficult things in his life, present to it, not overwhelmed by it. He got a call from a local television reporter, a woman from the evening news who had covered Veterans Affairs before and approached the story with genuine care rather than manufactured urgency. He agreed to speak. The interview ran 2 nights later. Henry sat in his kitchen with the old truck visible through the window behind him, and he talked. He didn't perform grief or anger. He said what was true in the plain language of a man who had learned a long time ago that plain language was the most powerful kind. He said Darius Cole had shown him more dignity in one evening than some institutions had shown him in 50 years. He said the truck had carried his brother home from a war, and a good man had treated it with the respect that deserved. He said he didn't want anyone punished. He wanted things to be right. The clip ran in full. It was the kind of television that was harder to dismiss than outrage, because it wasn't outrage. It was just an old man telling the truth in a kitchen. Corporate shareholders were watching. Several of them called Marcus's office that week, not to demand action, to ask questions. The careful, pointed kind that translate in financial language to this is becoming a liability. Brand perception surveys that the communications team ran quietly showed a measurable drop in customer trust ratings in the markets where the story had received the most coverage. Marcus held 2 internal meetings that week. Neither of them included Darius or Noah. But the audit was running, and the audit was finding things. The forensic accounting team, brought in externally at Noah's insistence before any of this had gone public, was now working with full corporate cooperation on Benton's regional records. What they were finding went further than inflated invoices. Benton had made modifications to the corporate diagnostic software itself, not just steering customers toward unnecessary services, but programming the system to generate specific false flags on vehicles that matched certain mileage ranges and model years. It was targeted. It was deliberate. It had been running for over a year and a half, and had affected hundreds of customers across 5 locations. It was not overzealous upselling. It was fraud. The legal team came to Marcus with the preliminary findings on a Thursday afternoon and laid it out in the antiseptic language that lawyers use when the news is bad and the liability is real. Wrongful termination exposure, consumer fraud exposure, potential class action from affected customers. And if Benton had acted with this level of premeditation, the question of what corporate leadership knew or should have known was going to follow close behind. Marcus sat very still through the entire presentation. When the lawyers finished, he asked one question. How many customers? The lead attorney looked at her notes. Preliminary count is 412 across the 5 locations. Possibly higher once we complete the full review. Marcus nodded once. He thanked them. He waited until they left to let his face do anything at all. On a Saturday morning, before the city was fully awake, Marcus Whitaker drove himself, no driver, no assistant, to the address Noah had given him. A residential street on the east side of town, modest houses with small yards, the kind of neighbor. He had been 7 years old the last time he'd sat in this truck. He remembered the gear shift. He remembered the way the engine sounded, rough and honest, like it was doing real work. He remembered his father's hands on the wheel. He stood in Henry's garage for 20 minutes. Nobody was there. He had come alone on purpose. When he left, he sat in his car outside for a few minutes before starting the engine. He was not a man who cried easily, and he didn't cry now, but something in his face had changed the way faces change when a person has been shown something they cannot unfeel. Noah had told him about Darius the day before. Not the footage, not the billing records. Those were already on the table. The rest of it, the Army service, the motor pool, the wife who had died when Lila was 3, a medical event that had come without warning and left Darius with a daughter, and a grief he carried the way certain men carry grief, which is to say quietly and continuously and without making it anyone else's problem. The 6 years at Precision where he had done his job at a level that made customers drive across town to see him. The way he had paid for Henry's parts out of his own pocket without hesitation, not as a gesture, just because it was the right thing to do, and the math of right and wrong in his mind did not include an exception for personal cost. Marcus drove back to his apartment and sat at his desk for a long time. He drafted a statement. He deleted it. He drafted another. He deleted that too. They all sounded like what they were, corporate language trying to put a human frame around a failure that was not, at its root, a communications problem. Benton, meanwhile, had not been quiet during his suspension. 2 days after his access was revoked, he made contact with a competing automotive service chain, a regional competitor called Summit Auto that had been watching Whitaker's brand exposure with the particular interest of a company that saw an opportunity in another company's trouble. Benton had an offer: proprietary pricing strategy documents, customer data segmentation models, and the internal diagnostic software modification framework he had built, in exchange for a position and legal support. It was plainly corporate espionage, the kind that triggered criminal statutes rather than just civil ones. He made the contact from his personal phone, through email, using his personal address. He deleted the sent messages. He thought he had been careful. He had not been careful. He had been sloppy in the particular way that panicked people are sloppy, focused on the immediate problem so hard that they stop seeing the peripheral one. Whitaker's IT security team had flagged his corporate credentials for monitoring before his access was revoked, standard protocol in investigations of this scale. When the external contact was made, it triggered an alert. The IT logs captured everything: IP addresses, timestamps, partial email headers that could be matched. The legal team was notified within 24 hours. It was Lila who found the other thing. She hadn't been looking for it. She had come home from school one afternoon to find her father at the kitchen table reviewing a stack of documents Noah had provided: billing summaries, timestamp service records, the kind of paperwork that covers a flat surface and organizes itself by its own internal logic. She sat down across from him and started flipping through pages the way she did, not because she understood all of it, but because she was curious and her father had always answered her questions about things she was curious about. She stopped at one page. She held it up. "Dad," she said, "this time is wrong." He looked at her. "What?" She put the page on the table and pointed. It was a security log from the shop. Camera timestamps matched against service records. There was a discrepancy on the evening Darius had performed the after-hours repair. Benton's incident report, which formed the basis of the termination documentation, cited a specific timestamp showing Darius had accessed the parts inventory at a time that, according to the camera log on the same page, was 17 minutes before the camera showed him arriving at the shop. The timestamp on the parts access had been altered. Someone had back-edited the log to make the inventory pull look unauthorized, but they had missed the cross-reference to the external camera system, which ran on a separate server with a separate timestamp record. The two records didn't match. A 17-minute gap that turned a cash purchase into apparent theft. Lila had noticed it because she was 9 years old and she read timestamps the way other kids read cereal boxes, carefully because the details were interesting. Darius stared at the page. He was quiet for a moment. "You sure?" he said. She pointed to both numbers without speaking. She was sure. He called Noah immediately. Noah took the documents to the forensic team that same afternoon. They confirmed it within 2 hours. The log modification was traceable. It had been made from Benton's management login at 11:40 in the evening on the day of the termination, after business hours. It had been designed to make the paper case against Darius airtight. Instead, it made the case against Benton airtight. The audit team briefed Marcus the next morning. By that point, they also had the IT security report on the corporate espionage contact. Marcus sat through both presentations without interruption. When they finished, he asked for the room. His senior VP, his legal lead, and his communications director all filed out. He sat alone for 10 minutes. Then he called Noah. Noah picked up on the second ring. Marcus said, "I need to meet with Darius Cole." There was a pause. "On what terms?" "No lawyers. No PR. No agenda." Another pause, longer. "I just want to talk to the man." Noah said he'd make it happen. Before that meeting took place, corporate lawyers made one last attempt at their preferred resolution. A courier arrived at Darius's apartment building with an envelope. Inside was a letter and a check. Compensation for wrongful termination, 2 months' salary, a letter of reference. The accompanying document, attached with a paper clip in the way you attach something you're hoping won't be noticed too quickly, was a non-disclosure agreement. Standard language. Signed, It would prevent Darius from discussing the circumstances of his termination publicly or participating in any future customer claims related to the same period. Darius read the NDA. He read it carefully, all of it, the same way he read a repair manual, to understand exactly what it was telling him. He put it back in the envelope and set it aside. When Noah arrived that evening, Darius told him about it. He said it clearly and without drama. "They want me to be the end of the story," he said. "Sign and disappear. I'm not the only one who got hurt by what Benin was running. I'm just the one with a name attached right now." Noah nodded slowly. "You know, refusing that makes you a harder problem for them." "Good," Darius said simply. "I should be a harder problem." There was a long beat of silence. Outside, the street was doing its evening business. Somewhere down the block, a kid was riding a bicycle in slow circles. Noah leaned forward. "Marcus called me today." He watched Darius' face. "He wants to meet with you." "No lawyers." Darius was quiet for a moment. "Does he know what he wants to say?" "I don't think so," Noah said. "Not yet, but I think he's trying to find out." He didn't say anything else. He didn't push. He sat there in Darius' kitchen with his coffee and let the question settle. Darius looked out the window. The sun was going down, painting the street in the long, low colors of early evening. He thought about 412 customers. He thought about the mechanics who had stood silent in the bay. He thought about Lila at the table, pointing at a number that didn't match, doing what she always did, paying attention to the thing that everyone else had walked past. He thought about his father, who had told him once that integrity was not the absence of cost. It was the willingness to pay it. He turned back to Noah. "Set it up," he said. Marcus, alone that same evening, sat in his apartment with a glass of water he hadn't touched, looking at a draft statement his PR team had prepared. It was a careful piece of writing, measured, apologetic in tone, without admitting liability, expressing commitment to review and reform without specifying what either would look like. It was the kind of statement that cost nothing and changed nothing and was designed to do exactly that. He read it twice. He picked up a pen. At the top of the page, in the margin, he wrote 2 words and circled them. "Too hollow." He set the pen down. He sat with that for a while. The transformation was not complete. He was not yet the man the end of this story required. But something had moved in him, some fixed thing that had been in place for a long time, a load-bearing belief about the relationship between profit and principle, between scale and accountability. And once something like that moves, it does not go back to where it was. He had built a machine. He had told himself the machine was necessary. The machine had hurt people. One of those people had looked at him across a desk with steady, quiet eyes and said, "We fix what's broken, nothing more." And Marcus Whitaker, for the first time in a long time, had felt the distance between who he was and who he had started out intending to be. He picked the pen back up. He turned the draft statement over to the blank side. He started writing something else. The meeting between Marcus Whitaker and Darius Cole happened on a Wednesday morning at a diner 8 blocks from Darius's apartment. No boardroom, no lawyers, no cameras. Marcus had suggested the corporate offices and Darius had said no, and Noah had suggested a neutral space. And this was what they landed on: a corner booth in a place called Rena's, where the coffee came in heavy ceramic mugs, and the booths had red vinyl seats worn smooth from years of people sitting in them with things to say. Darius was already there when Marcus arrived. He was drinking coffee, not looking at his phone. He watched Marcus come through the door, watched him take in a room and adjust himself to it. A wealthy, controlled man entering a space built for ordinary people and doing the quiet work of not making that obvious. He was wearing a plain jacket over a collared shirt. Notia. He had made an effort, Darius could see, to look like someone who wasn't trying. He sat down across from Darius. The waitress came, poured coffee, left. For a moment, neither man said anything. "I've been thinking," Marcus said finally, "about what to say to you since Henry walked into my office." He looked at his coffee. "I haven't figured it out yet." "Then don't figure it out," Darius said. "Just say it." Marcus looked at him. Something in the precision of that response, "Just say it," seemed to land the right way. He set his hands flat on the table. What Benton was doing in that region, the diagnostic manipulation, the inflated billing, I didn't build that. But I built the conditions that made it possible. The pressure on revenue margins, the upsell mandates, the culture that valued the number on the ticket over the trust of the customer. He paused. I told myself that was efficiency. That's not what it was. Darius waited. You fixed an old man's truck, Marcus said. You paid for the parts yourself. You did it at night, alone, knowing it could cost you your job. And it did cost you your job. And you still, when my lawyer sent a check and an NDA, you said no. He shook his head slightly. I've been building businesses for 20 years, and I don't know that I have ever done something that purely correct. You're talking about it like it was complicated, Darius said. It wasn't complicated. He needed the truck fixed. I fixed it. That's the part one keeps sitting with, Marcus said quietly. The fact that it was simple to you. Outside, the city was moving in its ordinary Tuesday morning way. A bus pulled to the curb. Two women walked past the window with coffee cups. The world did not know this conversation was happening and would not have paused for if it did. What do you want to do? Darius asked, not accusingly, just the question. Marcus had the blank page statement folded in his jacket pocket. He had been carrying it for 4 days. He took it out now and slid it across the table. It was handwritten, 2 pages, not typed, not reviewed by communications. Darius read it slowly. His expression didn't change while he read, but when he finished, he set it back on the table and looked at Marcus with something that wasn't forgiveness yet, but was several steps in its direction. This is real, Darius said. I'm going to read it at a press conference this afternoon, Marcus said. I wanted you to see it first. Why? Because you're the one it should be said to. The press conference was not what the communications team had planned. They had built a podium arrangement, a backdrop with the company logo, a prepared statement that had been approved by legal. Marcus walked past all of it to a plain microphone at the edge of the stage, and what he said, unscripted, looking directly at the cameras, was the handwritten version. Unpolished, personal, accountable. He did not speak in the plural. He did not say the company regrets or leadership acknowledges. He said, I built something that hurt people. He said the name Kyle Benton and the number 412 customers. He said the name Darius Cole and the word wrong. He said it wasn't enough to fire the person who ran the fraud when the philosophy that enabled it had come from the top. The room was quiet through most of it. Real quiet. The kind that happens when people are not reacting, just receiving. By the time Marcus finished speaking, 3 things had already happened. A veterans organization that had been watching the story had issued a public statement of support for Darius. A consumer advocacy group had called the corporate offices requesting a meeting about customer restitution. And Derek, the mechanic who had posted the original footage, had been contacted by a journalist writing a long-form piece on the broader pattern of diagnostic software manipulation across the auto service industry. A story that was going to be much bigger than one shop in one city. 2 days after the press conference, the shareholders met. Not the scheduled quarterly meeting. An emergency session called by the board at the insistence of 3 of the largest institutional investors who had watched the coverage and run their own liability projections. Marcus walked into that room, not knowing whether he would walk out as CEO. He had not prepared a defense. He had prepared a plan. He presented it directly. A restructured ethics oversight model, an independent customer audit board with authority over pricing disputes, a mandatory transparency policy for diagnostic recommendations, and a full restitution fund for the 412 customers identified in the Benton audit. He put a number on the restitution fund. It was not a small number. He did not flinch when he said it. The board asked questions for 2 hours. Some of them were pointed. Some were the kind of questions that are really statements wearing a question mark. Marcus answered all of them without deflection. When it was over, the board voted to retain him. Not unanimously, but with a majority that understood, even if reluctantly, that replacing him now would look like abandonment rather than accountability, and that the plan he had presented was more credible than anything an emergency replacement could produce in the current environment. He walked out still CEO. He also walked out knowing that what he did next would determine whether that meant anything. Kyle Benton's arrest was not dramatic. It rarely is. A detective and a corporate attorney were present. The charges included consumer fraud, falsification of business records, and attempted theft of trade secrets. The last one from the Summit Auto contact, which the IT logs had documented completely. Benton's attorney arrived 40 minutes later and began the slow work of negotiation that follows when the evidence is substantial and the defendant has run out of alternatives. The story ran on the evening news as a sidebar to the coverage of Marcus's press conference. Not the headline. The headline was Marcus. Benton was a paragraph near the bottom, a name attached to consequences, which was where he belonged. Inside the shops across the chain's 47 locations, something else was happening that was quieter, but in some ways more significant. Whistleblowers were coming forward. Not dramatically, not with press releases, just employees calling the newly established ethics hotline that the company had activated the day after the press conference, describing specific incidents of pressure to push unnecessary services, of complaints that had been dismissed, of customers they had wanted to help and hadn't, because the system made it costly to do so. 11 employees across 4 locations. Then 16. Then 22. Marcus read every report. He asked that they be sent directly to him, unfiltered. Some of his executives thought that was unusual. He did not explain himself. He just read them. Darius got a call from Noah on the 4th day after the press conference. Noah asked if he was ready to hear the real offer. Not a private garage, not a quiet exit. Something else. Noah explained it plainly. Marcus wanted to create a new position, Director of Service Ethics, reporting directly to the executive level, with authority to audit service practices, review customer complaints, and set training standards across all locations. It would require someone who understood the work from the ground up, who could not be managed in a comfortable distance from the reality of the shop floor, and who had demonstrated, under considerable personal cost, that they were not available to be compromised. Darius listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When Noah finished, Darius was quiet for a moment. "I want in writing," he said, "autonomy clause, community initiative budget, and any veteran service program has to be real, not a logo on a flyer." "I'll tell him," Noah said. There was something in his voice that might have been relief. "And Noah," Darius paused, "thank you for coming to my door. Thank you for not slamming it," Noah said. Darius sat at his kitchen table after the call and looked at the wall for a while. He thought about his wife. He thought about her at times like this, when something important was about to change, the way you reach for a person even after they're gone because the habit of reaching outlasts the presence. He thought about what she would have said. Probably something both practical and kind, the way she had always been. She had believed in him in a way that was so matter-of-fact it had felt like weather. Not dramatic, just consistently true. He missed her. He always would. But the life they had been building together had continued in a different shape, and that shape had a daughter in it who noticed timestamps and asked the right questions and held his hand walking out of a garage, and that was not nothing. That was, in many ways, everything. He got up and started cooking dinner. The contract was signed on a Monday. Darius read every page of it himself. Not because he didn't trust Noah, but because that was the kind of man he was. He made 3 small revisions, all of which Marcus accepted without negotiation. The autonomy clause was there. The community initiative budget was there. The veteran service program, outlined in a full page of specifics, was there. Darius signed it with the same pen he used to document repair notes. The first week in his new role, he did not sit in an office. He went to 3 different locations across the chain and spent 2 days at each one, working alongside the mechanics, listening more than talking. He did not arrive as an executive. He arrived as someone who knew what it felt like to be under a car at 7 in the morning with a manager's quota hanging over the day. He listened to what people were afraid of and what they needed and what they had been trying to do right even when the system had made it difficult. He took notes in a spiral-bound notebook. Not a laptop, not a tablet. A notebook, the same kind Lila used for her engine sketches. 3 weeks into his new role, Darius was called into Lila's school. He expected a discipline issue, some friction from the weeks of media attention. What he found instead was the principal of Lila's school, a steady woman named Mrs. Ashworth, who had organized a small assembly for the 4th and 5th grade classes. She asked Darius if Lila would be willing to say a few words. Lila had been told about it the night before. She had not said much in response. She had gone to her room and sat with it, the way she sat with things. In the morning, she had her sketchbook under her arm and her pencils in her pocket, which was how she always went to school, and Darius had not asked her if she was ready because he already knew she was. She stood at the front of the gymnasium with about 80 children looking at her, and she did not look nervous. She looked like herself, steady, particular, present. She said, "My dad lost his job for helping someone who needed help. He knew he might get in trouble, and he did it anyway." She paused. "He told me that sometimes doing right costs something. I've been thinking about that for a while." Another pause. "I think the thing is that if you only do right when it's free, you don't actually believe in it. You just believe in free." The gymnasium was very quiet. Mrs. Ashworth, standing to the side, was looking at Lila with the expression of an educator who has been in the business long enough to recognize when a child says something that most adults spend a lifetime working toward. Darius, sitting in the back row, looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at his daughter. She was 9 years old, and she was already more certain about the important things than people 3 times her age. He was very glad to be her father. Marcus and Noah had dinner together for the first time in 4 years on a Thursday evening at a restaurant neither of them had chosen. Noah had said somewhere neutral, and Marcus had agreed, which was itself a small thing that meant something. They sat across from each other with the particular awkwardness of people who have known each other all their lives and have also hurt each other in ways that don't resolve quickly. They talked about their father. That was where they started, and it was the right place to start. They talked about the truck and what it had meant to him and what it had meant to them growing up. They talked about the company, what it had been when he built it, what it had become, what it might still be. Marcus said, "I know I lost the thread." Noah said, "You can find it again." "Is that what you think?" "I think you already started." They didn't fix everything that night. 4 years of estrangement doesn't resolve over one dinner, and neither of them pretended it did. But they were talking, and talking was the first repair, and both of them were men who understood that the first repair mattered, even when there was more work ahead. The Veteran Initiative launched 6 weeks after Darius signed his contract. It was called the Henry Program, which had been Darius's suggestion and which Marcus had accepted immediately. Free comprehensive vehicle inspections for all veterans at every Whitaker automotive location. No appointment required, no upsell pressure, no strings. Qualifying veterans with vehicles in need of critical safety repairs could apply for assistance through a fund that the company had capitalized at $1 million and committed to replenishing annually. Henry came to the launch event. He wore the same jacket with the decorations on the breast. He shook Marcus's hand, a long, deliberate handshake, the kind that means more than the gesture, and Marcus held it a beat longer than was strictly necessary, which was noticed by the people nearby and commented on afterward by a few of them, not publicly, but in the way important moments get recorded in small conversations. Henry did not make a speech. He had been asked and had declined. He just walked through the event with his cane, talking to the veterans who came, most of whom had heard the story and some of whom were there because of it. He was not the center of the room and did not try to be. He was just present, which was how he had always navigated the world. Benton's sentencing happened 6 weeks after that. The charges had been pleaded down through negotiation. The trade secrets count was the fulcrum that gave prosecutors leverage over the rest, and the outcome was a combination of fines, restitution obligations, and a suspended sentence with probation conditions that included a permanent bar from working in any supervisory capacity in automotive retail. His career, in the form it had taken, was over. The news covered it briefly. 2 paragraphs, a case number, a name. It was the right amount of space. Justice that needs a lot of fanfare to feel like justice usually isn't quite. Darius read the article. He set it down. He did not feel triumphant, which was how he had expected to feel, or how people expected him to feel. He felt something quieter and more complete, the particular satisfaction of a thing being put right, which is different from the satisfaction of winning. Winning was about yourself. Putting something right was about the thing itself. He went back to his notebook. The mentorship program came together over 2 months of planning and 3 of logistics. Darius worked with a workforce development nonprofit to build a pipeline from high school career programs in 3 underserved districts into paid apprenticeships at Whitaker locations. The curriculum was his, grounded in diagnostic honesty, in customer communication, in the philosophy that a mechanic's job was not to manufacture revenue, but to identify truth. Every apprentice would spend their first week not under a car, but talking to customers, because Darius had always believed, that the engine and the person driving it were equally part of the work. 12 young people enrolled in the first cohort. Darius met each of them individually during orientation. He asked each one the same question: why do you want to do this work? He listened to all 12 answers without rushing any of them. One of them, a 17-year-old from the east side, named Terrell, who had grown up watching his uncle fix neighbors' cars in a driveway, said, "Because there's something that feels right about fixing something that's broken. Like you made the world a little more like it should be." Darius looked at him for a long moment. "Yeah," he said, "that's exactly it." On a weekend in late autumn, Darius and Lila built a small workshop in the space behind their new apartment, a ground floor unit with a back area that had been used for storage and was now cleared out and clean, a workbench along one wall, good lighting, a pegboard for tools. It was not large. It was enough. He had brought a few things from his storage unit where he'd been keeping his late wife's belongings. Not many, just a few. A photograph. A small ceramic figure she had kept on the windowsill in the kitchen of their old place. A letter she had written him early in their marriage that he had kept folded in his wallet until the wallet wore out, and then kept flat in a book. He put the photograph on the corner of the workbench in the light. Lila set up her own section, a stool, a smooth piece of wood for a drawing surface, her pencils in a jar. She had started a new sketchbook. The first drawing was the F-100, the old green truck, rendered from memory with the careful attention she brought to everything. She had drawn it head-on, full and solid, the headlights like eyes. She was working on the second drawing now. It was taking longer. She was being particular about it. On a Saturday morning in November, Henry Whitaker drove the restored 1972 Ford F-100 to a company event at the flagship Whitaker Automotive location, a customer appreciation day that was also, quietly, a reset of what the brand was trying to be. The truck drew looks in the parking lot the way old, honest things draw looks. People gathered around it. Henry let them look and answer questions about it with the patience of someone who understood that the truck was not just a truck, had never been just a truck, and appreciated that other people could see that now. Marcus was waiting near the entrance when Henry pulled in. He watched the truck come to a stop. He walked over. Henry got out, moving a little slower than he had months ago, but steady on his feet, and Marcus opened the passenger door without being asked and got in. They sat in the truck together for a few minutes, not talking much, the engine ticking as it cooled, the October light coming in low through the windshield. "Your father loved this truck," Henry said. "I know," Marcus said. "He used to say that a machine that was taken care of would take care of you back." Henry looked straight ahead through the windshield. "I always thought he was talking about more than trucks." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I think I understand that better now than I did." Henry nodded. That was enough. Inside the event, Darius was standing near the service bay with his notebook, watching the day run. The new training posters were up, clear, customer-facing, explaining what a diagnostic recommendation meant and how customers could ask questions about it. 3 of the apprentices from the first cohort were present, in their program shirts, talking to attendees. They were nervous in the good way of people who are new to something real. Terrell was explaining a brake assembly to a man who had asked a question, his hands moving through the description the way Darius's always had, not performing knowledge, just sharing it. Darius watched that for a moment with something quiet and warm moving through him. He found a bench near the side of the event space and sat down. Lila came and sat beside him. She had her new sketchbook. She opened it to the page she had been working on. She had finished it this morning, she said. She turned it toward him. It was the truck again, but this time it was smaller in the frame. The truck in the middle distance on an open road, and in the foreground, 3 figures standing beside it. Not portraits, not detailed. She had drawn them simply the way children draw figures when they are thinking about meaning rather than likeness. But you could tell them apart. The tallest one was clearly her father. The one with the cane was Henry. And the one standing slightly apart, hands at his sides, facing the road rather than the viewer, that was Marcus. At the bottom of the page, in her small neat print, she had written a caption, Things worth fixing. Darius looked at the drawing for a long time. He looked at the three figures on the road beside the truck that had started all of this. He thought about his father's saying. He thought about the army and his wife and the 6 years he had spent doing right in a shop that didn't want to reward him for it. He thought about Henry saluting him across a parking lot. He thought about Noah standing on his sidewalk with a folded piece of paper and enough integrity to understand when a man didn't want rescue. He put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. She leaned into him the way she had since she was small, easy and certain, the way children lean into the people they are sure of. "That's a good drawing," he said. She looked at it critically, the way she looked at everything she made. "The proportions on Henry are a little off." "It's perfect," he said. She thought about arguing. Then she looked at it again and decided, this once, that perfect was close enough to the truth to let it stand. Outside, the truck sat in the autumn light. 60 years old, green fading toward gray, chrome-pitted, bench seat cracked along one seam. It had carried a man home from a war. It had sat in a barn for a decade. It had rattled into a parking lot on a Thursday afternoon and changed the course of several lives. It was still running. Some things, fixed with enough care and held with enough respect, just keep going. If integrity always came with a price tag, how many of us would still choose it? And how many good people are we losing because we don't? Hit like, subscribe, and stay with us. We tell the stories that matter.